So, how do you came to know about RSS and how RSS interested you? Because you have written a book on Dr. Hegdewar. So, what is your view of RSS?
So rather than my view of the RSS, uh, over decades of coming to India, first just to find my family roots. I live in the United Kingdom. I was raised there. So I initially came to India to find my roots. I then came to India on various different business activities. I now have many friends all across India. And the more I came to India, the more I realized that there's something called the RSS. And then this RSS has interwoven itself into the fabric of Indian society. And so I wanted to understand, what is the RSS? What is it trying to achieve? And who is the founder of the RSS? And what did he believe in? What was his philosophy? And so I began to do research into the RSS and into Keshav Hedgewar.
Okay. So, when it is coming to RSS, it is completing its 100 years at 2025. So, it has a very long journey, as we all know. So, it has many highs and many ups and downs. So, what are all the key achievements you think about RSS?
I think the RSS is now 100 years old, rightly so. Um, and in that journey, even though 100 years feels like a long time, it seems to me that having read the archives and some of the source materials around Keshav Hedgewar, that his vision was indeed long term. He was building an institution that would not just outlast him, but I think he was building an institution that would be around for many decades, if not centuries. And so, in that time, I think what I sense that the RSS is trying to do, and what it continues to do, is that it's meant to build social capital within the Indian society. um, Keshav Hedgewar created a critique of Indian society, which was that Indian society had basically become fossilized by caste, class, and creed. Creed meaning religion. These things had effectively meant that Indian society lacked the cooperation, the trust between each other, and therefore the society became socially immobile and no longer innovative. And a society that does not innovate eventually declines. So, from the Hedgewarian perspective, the aim of the Shaka is to build social capital, build friendships, build a level of trust and cooperation between people who are different, people who may believe in different things, people who come from different ethnic backgrounds, people who may come from different linguistic backgrounds, or different religious beliefs, can come together in the Shaka and build cooperation, build trust. To that extent, I think it's self evident that the RSS has just continued to grow. I think on the last count, maybe there are some 80,000 centers around India, which are the engines of this social capital. So, to that extent, of course, the RSS has grown tremendously. And then, furthermore, RSS is involved in labor unions, student unions, reforming agriculture, protecting the environment. They're involved in tribal work, arts, dance, music, you name it. And of course, they're also uh, RSS trained individuals are also involved in politics. So, so you've got this whole thing, and so I think modern India, um, in order to understand modern India, one has to understand the RSS.
So, what is the difference between the other leaders and Dr. Hideva? How was movement supported in this freedom movement?
So, what I think really differentiates Keshav Hedgewar from a lot of his contemporaries was the fundamental difference of political nationalism and cultural nationalism. Savarkar, Bose, Ambedkar, uh, Munjay, Tilak, Gandhi, Nehru, all these people were nationalists. But they were what I would consider to be political nationalists. What I mean by that is, for them, the important thing was to capture the state, capture the Rajya, right? And then once you've captured the state, you can reform the society. You can make the society better, whatever good might mean to them. For Keshav Hedgewar and the Hedgewarian perspective, he had discovered that the Indian challenge, which was much deeper, he felt that the very essence of Indianness was missing. And so he felt that it was important that you rebuild the Rashtra, so the society. And so hence he moves away from political nationalism and into cultural nationalism. So cultural nationalism is where you bring people together who are all encompassing in terms of their diversity of ethnicities, beliefs, religions, etc. But they come together under one collective umbrella, one collective memory, one understood history. And underneath that, they all come together. And that's cultural nationalism. And so Keshav Hedgewar becomes a cultural nationalist. And so this makes him not just different, I think this makes the Hedgewarian thought that much more potent. That the Hedgewarian thought was much more long term. And he was very clear that the Rashtra is real, the Rajya is imaginary, and so the only a strong Rashtra can discipline the Rajya, not the other way around.
Okay. So you argue with the terms like Rashtra and Rajya. So how do you feel the difference between Rashtra and Rajya and the Hedgewar perspective? Can you
Yeah.
elaborate more detail on that?
So from the Hedgewarian perspective, the Rajya is equivalent to the state. What is the state? Um, the state is the bureaucracy. The state is the judiciary. The state could be law enforcement. The state could be the military. Uh, so the state apparatus, right? Um, um, uh, Collectively is what the Rajya is. That which gives us the scaffolding through which we live our lives, right? So as law and order, uh, justice, fairness, education, etc., etc. Rashtra is the social capital. The social capital, I mean, the invisible bonds that bind people. So a Rashtra is built of individuals who are capable, who have a certain character, and they come together. Uh, and the activities can be anything. It could be sports, it could be charity work, it could be educational, healthcare, whatever it might be. But through that activity, they build camaraderie, they build friendships, they build cooperation, and they help each other. And that sense of security, a social security, allows the Rashtra to be built. And when you have a very strong Rashtra, then naturally the Rajya is obedient to the Rashtra, i.e., the state serves the people. Um, from the Hedgewarian perspective, and my perspective also, I would say that in India, the state seems to be dictatorial, and the people have to kind of almost um, uh, live according to the whims of the state, when really it should be the other way around. So these are the differences between Rashtra and Rajya. Now, a lot of people feel that you have to control the Rajya to change the Rashtra. Hedgewar didn't feel that. Hedgewarian thought was you build the Rashtra, then you build the Rajya, and then discipline it to make sure that the desires, the ambitions of the Rashtra are fulfilled.
Okay. So when it is coming to India, so people are diverse. We can say from Kashmir to Kanyakumari by language, the people how the communities, multiple different cultures are there. How do you think when you want to unite India? So there's some speculation like unity of Hindu. So you are excluding other peoples like Islam or Jain or Buddhist. So how do you think RSS really function? It is inclusive of all these items, or it is saying inclusive of Hindu? If it is inclusive of Hindu, who is the first to get inclusive when it is coming to multiple castes? So how the start of RSS is working on this?
So my data points informed me that from the Hedgewarian perspective, the social engine, the thing that would create social capital for Indian society, this thing called the Shaka, was a casteless, classless, and creedless space where the common Indian can come and through various activities build this social capital, build this relationship. And then that social capital would be pointed towards bettering the society, building institutions. And those institutions could be schools, they could be hospitals, they could be farming cooperatives, they could be banking cooperatives, whatever it might be. So, so therefore, from the Hedgewarian perspective, the Shaka was for everyone, regardless of also creed, meaning religion. So therefore, from the Hedgewarian perspective, I would argue that the Shaka is a place for Muslims, for Christians, for communists, for atheists, for people of all linguistic backgrounds, people of all dietary backgrounds. It really doesn't matter from the Hedgewarian perspective. I don't think Hedgewar particularly cared about what you believed in or how you worshipped. Where the red line does matter from the Hedgewarian perspective is this thing called Deshbhakti. Now, sadly, in a lot of popular narratives, the word Deshbhakti has been translated as patriotism. Uh, and having spent a lot of time grappling with these terms and then seeing the movements on the ground, I began to realize that actually patriotism does not serve this word Deshbhakti very well at all. Patriotism, by its very nature, creates an in group and an out group, by its very nature. And the Rajya will always use patriotism as a way of dividing the people. You can divide the people on religion, caste, and class. Everything that Hedgewar was against. So, what the Hedgewarian mind does, the red line is Deshbhakti. Now, Deshbhakti is something quite interesting. Deshbhakti, as far as I can see, is where an individual, his or her ego, transcends, goes beyond just the self, and it merges to varying degrees with the very land itself, with the very soil itself. And therefore, whatever the soil has produced, both historically, now, and in the future, is mine. I feel connected with it. I feel that I own it. That means the trees, the rivers, the mountains, the vegetation, the fauna, the animals, but also the culture, the arts, the dance, the languages, the diet, uh, 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 comedy, humor, all of that which this land has produced is mine, including the people. So, regardless, therefore, of your race, of your ethnicity, and all the other, uh, if you are connected, if you feel that this is your soil, this is your land, then you are in the in group. So, you see, this is how the Hedgewarian mind can encompass the entirety of the Indian society, which is incredibly diverse, both ethnically, linguistically, religiously, and it has so many different connotations. But underneath this idea, the umbrella of Deshbhakti, all of these people can be found as space. Um, and so this was the Hedgewarian attempt at building a nation.
Okay. So you have made many research about Dr. Hedgewar. So whom do you think he has been inspired a lot from this idea to form this concept called RSS, Shaka?
So the very idea of the RSS and this idea of social capital um, doesn't come to Hedgewar, in a sense of a eureka moment. He was sitting under a tree in meditation, and it just came. It's the quite opposite. The idea of the RSS um, uh, comes over decades of lived experience, and uh, several things come to mind when we think about what shaped the Hedgewarian mind. One is that he was rooted in indigenous traditions. So he was familiar with the history of Shivaji. He was familiar with Das Bodh, Mano Bodh. He could recite these aphorisms, these works of literature fluently. He was exposed to obviously the classical texts of the Rig Veda, the Upanishads, and so on and so forth. But Hedgewar was also a composite. He was also, as a young man, prolifically reading in English Voltaire, Nietzsche, Marx, Mazzini, the Greek philosophers. And so he is a fusion of not just indigenous thought, where he was rooted and obviously very inspired by, but he was also equally inspired by global ideas, global thoughts. And I don't think this bit gets emphasized enough that the Hedgewarian mind is a globalist mind. It is a universal mind. And so these influences intellectually shaped him somewhat. The second bit is his lived experience. He grew up in relative poverty. He lost his parents at the age of 12 through to the Black Plague, a terrible way to lose both mother and father on the same day. And one can just imagine the trauma that would cause a 12-year-old boy at that time to go through. Um, and But then, of course, he again has a stroke of luck. He gets adopted by a man called Dr. Munjay, who is one of the wealthiest men of Nagpur, maybe Maharashtra at the time, a eye surgeon, retired military officer in the British Army, who had fought in the Boer Wars. Um, and so suddenly he has exposure now to wealth, to the best education. Um, and so the young Keshav is a composite of all these experiences that he has that I think later on makes him the cultural nationalist that he becomes.
Why do you think I need to read your book?
I think Hedgewar is more relevant today than I think he's ever been. Um, I would argue that to understand modern India, one has to understand the RSS. I think it's quite difficult and really short sighted of anybody, any policymaker, any investor, any commentator to comment on India without truly getting a handle and grappling with the RSS. Whether you like the RSS, dislike the RSS, you think it's a force for good or malevolence, that's by the by. But I think you have to understand and grapple with the RSS. To understand the RSS, you have to understand Hedgewar and the Hedgewarian philosophy, the Hedgewarian mind. Um, and therefore, I think this book, as far as I can tell, is the first English researched biography which begins to answer some of these kind of questions as to who was Keshav Hedgewar and how did he become the man that he did and how did he form this organization that even after 100 years seems to be going from strength to strength and is in some very real sense shaping 1/5 of humanity.
What do you think if RSS was not there, how India would be?
So what would the RSS be? Sorry, what
Uh,
would India be? Okay, so what would India be if the RSS was never formed? Um, it's a good question, and it forces me to do some crystal ball gazing. So I can conjecture, and it's only a conjecture for what it's worth. But I think, again, whether you think the RSS is a force for good or force for bad, that's by the by, what cannot be denied is that what the RSS has done in this country is that it's given a formula for the diversity of this place, both caste, class, and creed, linguistic diversity, to come under one banner, to come under this one idea of Rashtra, of nation, and this project of nation building, to a large extent, the proof of concept has been done. And I think it's now it seems like a very mature concept that is now right the way across Indian society. So if you were just to reverse that, I think without the RSS, um, India may be even more fragmented. Uh, Indians may be even more divided into subgroups, subclasses, sub-religions, subsects, and so on and so forth. And of course, when a society is increasingly more fragmented, um, the ugliness of patriotism creeps up. And when you have that kind of fever, conflict is inevitable. So maybe India would have been more, uh, it would have faced more violence. It would have faced more difficulties in building its own economy and its own sense of self, I suppose. So I think without the RSS, I think India may be more fragmented.